burial rites affect that, and we're going to argue to you later. Burial rites, especially burial ceremonies, necessarily accord you as a respectable person and as a human person to begin with, and why perpetrators of crime against humanity do not necessarily have that anymore. Lastly, this debate is also about humanity and why perpetrators of said crime are no longer human and are no longer citizens of the state, which are afforded to rights at the end of the day. Given that, this debate will revolve around four simple premises. Firstly, the crimes against humanity in nature is the most extreme act that devoids people, even of yourself, of your humanity, and your human nature. Because it's easy to think that people are more inclined to love others or to do good to others. But in comparison to murder or just completely stealing, we think crimes against humanity are premeditated acts that takes a long time in order for you to actually think of killing of millions of people or coming up with a procedure to kill them. Secondly, rights are taken away on the basis of direct harm, and we think that, especially in this case, there is direct disregard for people's rights. Thirdly, burial rights are a recognition of people's contributions to the state and to humanity, and later on I'm going to prove to you why perpetrators don't have that. And lastly, the pursuit of oneself will always take into account other people, because necessarily human beings are always relational and all our acts will always affect each other. No thank you. So what we're going to propose to you coming from government bench. Firstly, we think we're going for all criminals that are tried and found guilty by any court, whether it be national or international courts, there will be no state, there will be no private or public service available for them for burial, which means that there will be no ceremonies, there will be no eulogies, there will be no prayers for them. Whatever is going to happen to them, and the best kind of burial they're ever going to get is if they rot in the ground or if they die in their bed, and even then, we're still not going to touch them. In order to win this debate, after my standards, we have to prove two things. Firstly, prove crimes against humanity and why this necessarily takes away your rights as a human being and as a citizen of the state. And secondly, where do we get best in tolerance against crimes against humanity? Go, Jazmin.
Will the victims be allowed to watch these videos or footages of the way these bodies are treated?
Of course, if, like, for example, we try someone, like, whatever happens to them in the prison can't necessarily be videotaped. Whatever happens to them in their death, we can't necessarily control. The point is, when they're dead, they're not going to touch them. We don't necessarily see your videotapes. It's not like we're going to torture them coming from our model. First argument, we're going to talk about when do we exactly take away rights. And here we're going to set the context. We think human beings in nature are actually connected and are all interrelational. We think the small acts of people, especially in society, in terms of you having a job, can contribute into a greater good in society, something called tax or something called circulating money for the state in order for it to have a trickle-down effect. Therefore, our ability to recognize a human being and a citizen is reliant on two things. Firstly, in terms of being a citizen, this is directly related for the person's ability to respect the rights of other people, while at the same time doing actions given that there are people who also have their rights. Meaning, that's why, for example, in status quo, when you murder someone, we directly ban that because you take away their right to life. What's the nuance with this motion? We think the simple nuance that unlike murder and unlike stealing, we think that crimes against humanity are premeditated. Meaning in the preparation, you actually took time on how I'm going to kill millions of people or how I'm going to kill tribesmen. No thinking. We think that this is a systematic way of thinking of rationalizing why something bad against people is good. And we'll talk about that later more in my second analysis. No thank you. We think given that, you violate your claim to rights simply because you already chose to abuse the rights of other people. But secondly, why do you lose your claim to humanity or why do you lose your claim to being human? We think the preparation stage to execute the plans to genocide or things like that already assumes that you've been preparing for the worst scenarios. And that assumes two things. Firstly, that means that you use all your resources, all your charisma, all the things that make you human. Like touching to feelings, giving rational thinking, in order for you to convince other people that your bad agenda is good and that your bad agenda is something that should be worth fighting for. Meaning, at the end of the day, what you only plan for is evil, and even though you admit that it is evil, you still do it. Why isn't that something to be considered human to begin with? Giving back my premise to you a while ago. We told you that all people are interrelational, meaning it is your duty to respect their existence. It is your duty to respect that their existence is actually proper for them and that their mere existence won't be harmed. And because you have devoted that by actually preparing to kill all of them and by actually preparing a scenario wherein they will feel most oppressed, we think you lose your claim to humanity. Second argument, let's talk about burial rites and why they necessarily accord respect. We think we can see that sometimes people do steal and sometimes people do murder. But we think coming from government bench, these things are what we consider to be mistakes. Because we admit that in the pursuit of, in the pursuit of humanity, we always try to find what our real purpose is. And these are some things we need to commit some mistakes in order for us to get back on the right track. What's the difference between the crimes against humanity? Going back to my first argument, crimes against humanity are premeditated and you actually take time in order to rationalize, in order to rationalize these things. That means that even if you know that it's bad, and that even if you know that people will get harmed, you have already no respect for their existence, that you've already admitted to yourself that I do not respect them as much as I do not respect myself, because even if everyone will die and everyone is not going to respect me, that is completely okay. We think burial rites in essence accord you some certain form of respect. That's why in eulogies, especially in eulogies, that's when you reconcile that this is what his mistake was. That when he stole something, this was his reason behind it. You can't do that for a perpetrator of crimes against humanity because you can't even rationalize or you can't even explain why he committed such an act to begin with. We think you can't use the reason that he was just trying to find himself, because when he found himself, he divided himself from humanity and he divided himself from other people. Because of that, we don't think that they don't deserve the rights to proper burial rites. Given this, what did I offer to you? Three things. Firstly, I told you that perpetrators of crimes against humanity aren't human and aren't citizens anymore. And lastly, that they don't deserve the respect because they never had the decency to give it in the first place. For these reasons, we're very happy to propose.